Welcome, everybody, to this meeting of the Council of the Town of Oakville. Today, everybody is present. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I don't see any. Our next matter is to turn to our sole discussion item, which is the official plan review update. And before we begin, I just want to say, for the public's benefit, that we have no registered delegations for this meeting, but if you are watching this meeting live and you wish to comment, you can. All you have to do is call 905-815-6095. We'll connect you to the meeting. There's a little bit of a delay between the live stream and the actual meeting, so we may wait a couple of minutes as we do each of those connections, but we've now done this many times and we know it works, so you can feel welcome and you can participate in the same way that councillors do via Zoom. I hope I haven't made a product placement error there, but anyway, we are now ready to receive a presentation from Mark Simeone, our Director of Planning Services. And Mark, I understand you have good news.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council. Yes, I do, in fact, have good news. You'd note in the staff report that accompanies today's presentation, I believe it's on page 5 of the report, that there was a reference to the status of OPA 26 and 27, which council had approved previously. These were recently approved. When I say recently, they were approved yesterday by the region, so I'm happy to report that those matters that council has approved have been approved by the region. Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. We're just going to go through this very quickly. We'll let you know that there's several opportunities in the presentation where we've designed, it might make sense for questions. So rather than holding them from the end, you may want to use that opportunity. As we think about it, in about a quarter of the presentation, there'll be an opportunity for questions. Thank you.
We're totally cool with what you want.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, welcome. And today's purpose of today's presentation, number one, I understand that all of council has a workshop tomorrow with the region, and that's with respect to the region's integrated growth management strategy, which is part of their regional official plan review. Because you're having that meeting tomorrow, we thought it was a good time to just take us back through a journey we've already been on. Much, if not all of this information has been provided to you in the past. But today is an opportunity just to remind ourselves where we've been and how it all fits in together. We'll talk about the region of Halton's official plan review process and, of course, its timing. And what's really important from Oakville's standpoint is Oakville's official plan review and process and timing, and for you to all clearly understand how these two processes align and complement each other. So we've seen these before, but I'll remind us again. The 2019 growth plan requires the region of Halton to achieve a population of 1 million people by 2041. The good news is you've already made decisions on that till 2031. So really what's before the region and the town is the time frame between 2031 and 2041. That means 180 more thousand people within the region of Halton between 2030 or 2041, sorry. There was a recent amendment to the growth plan, and when I say recent, I mean June 16th of this year. This extends the time frame out to 2051, and so that is a relatively new piece, and the details of that have not been finalized, so I can only give you a broad brush understanding of what that means. It's been released for comment. So there's 3 scenarios with respect to that. Sorry. There's a low scenario that sees about 60,000 more people in the region of Halton between 2041 and 2051. There's a reference scenario that sees about 100,000 more people in that same time frame. And there's a high scenario that sees 160,000 people in that time frame. So as I said earlier, the province hasn't landed on the final numbers. So in our minds, we're thinking somewhere between 60,000 and 160,000 new people in the region of Halton. Where they'll go, that's a function of the regional official plan process and the finalization of those numbers with the province. So this is an informative slide. If you look on the extreme left of the side, you'll see 2009. 2009 was when Oakville Council adopted Livable Oakville. That plan set into place growth strategies, basically where and how we want to grow from the period of 2021 to 2031, or 2041. 2031, sorry. If you notice, the gray arrows stop at 2031. So we've already made decisions with respect to where and how we'll grow, and these decisions have been endorsed by the region, and those numbers are tied down. The current official plan review that the region of Halton is considering is the space between 2031 and 2041. The stuff you've already approved is not up for discussion. The 2041 to 2051 number on the chart is there to remind us that as of June 16th, the province introduced the new changes to the growth plan, again with that range in population of somewhere between 60,000 new people and 160,000 new people across the region of Halton in a further 10-year time frame. I would point out the numbers under this amendment to the growth plan are seen as minimums from the province. So what we're looking at here is what we've already, this chart explains what we've already done, and at the top you'll see what's happening with respect to the region's work that's gone on as well. So if we look at the bottom, we'll start with the town of Oakville. I'd like to say too that the process we've experienced and the region participates with us in is a bottom-up, top-down approach. And when I say bottom-up approach is that the local municipalities, in our case the town of Oakville, are able to deal with local issues, and you'll see on the bottom of the slide, you see urban structure OPA, official plan amendment number 15, approved in April of 2018. Then you see a number of OPA 20, OPA 19, and so on. And then on the right side, you'll see OPA 26 and 27, which were approved yesterday. So all of this work has been approved now. All of this work now tells us where and how we want to grow in the context of the town of Oakville. It's the region's job to say, great, you've told us where you want to grow. We're going to assign the numbers to your municipality through our exercise. So that's that top down, and that's a legislative power that the region has with respect to the planning process and the two-tier environment in this municipality. So we're locally engaged, and planning staff through your efforts at council have been engaged with the community to understand these important issues of where and how we want to grow. You see it through urban structure, which is a very important document, the employment commercial, Spears Road corridor. These drill down to some very local important areas. 3 growth areas are represented here, downtown Oakville, Kerr, and Bronte, and the other ones are still underway, will still occur. Across the top, you'll see what the region's been doing in a similar time frame. We'll get into that as the slides move on. I'll just highlight them for you. The region highlighted earlier in 2020, or sorry, tomorrow actually, or coming up, is the work that's being undertaken by the region. Here we are. So this is our works, Uptown Hospital District. This is work underway right now. The Bronte Go Major Transportation Study Area, or MTSA as it's referred to. North Oakville West, including Palermo, Midtown Oakville, these are all underway. They're not been completed, different from the previous work we've done. If you look further on the right at the bottom, you'll see that we have official plan review discussion papers. That's work that's still to occur that you'll be engaged with as we go forward, including the residential review. And then near the end of the process, we'll have the conformity official plan amendment with respect to the region's work and our work, and this is a requirement of the provincial government, and that deadline is July 1st of 2022. Excuse me for a sec. At the top highlighted in yellow, that represents the regional work that's being undertaken. Well, it took us back to a workshop that regional councillors were involved with in November of last year, the integrated growth management concepts. You may recall that we presented that information to you, I think it was last September, and that council had directed staff to go and further engage local residents about what their concerns were with respect to that stuff. So we've gathered that information on your behalf and fed that into the regional system. There was a further April 7th of this year integrated growth management preferred growth concept at the Regional Council on April 14th, and that work has also been completed. All of that work launches continued staff work and further public consultation, which allows the community to come together on the various issues that have been identified. So we'll talk a little bit about the Halton Region Integrated Growth Management Study. So the fun thing about planning is we have all sorts of acronyms for things, the regional IGMS, but really think about it as how and where the region of Halton wants to grow. So the Integrated Growth Management Strategy is kind of like their urban structure in a sense. It defines at a broad level conceptually how they want things to be spread out as we move forward to that 2041 and now that 2051 timeframe. And we talked to you about this before, but it's important to remind ourselves what we've talked about again. Really, there's 4 things that can happen in terms of the concept of the integrated management strategy at the regional level. Number 1, you can see if you can accommodate all existing settlement within the built-up area. And that's, I can do this a little better on the next slide, but I'll just highlight this now. In existing settlement area boundaries on the current designated Greenfield area, through employment land conversions, or designating new Greenfield areas through settlement boundary expansion. With respect to communities like Oakville, there's really no opportunity for Greenfield expansion because we're basically at the north limit of the community of Oakville is really the limit of the settlement boundary. This shows that same information differently. So through the built-up area, which include employment conversions, if you look on the slide, you'll see the various areas in orange. This says that one opportunity to consider growth is all the growth for 2031 to go to 2041 and into 2051 should be handled in the areas highlighted in the yellow-orange color that I'm highlighting here with the mouse. The second one is urban growth centers and major transit stations. So you'll see the urban growth centers are in our case, it's Midtown. In the case of Burlington, it was and may not be, but it was their downtown. Each community has an urban growth center. Our UGC is provincially recognized as is Burlington's in the growth plan. The next one is designated Greenfield. So this would be, in Oakville's context, the Greenfield is really that area north of Dundas. That word Greenfield is a built boundary reference to planning work that happened, I think, in about 2007, that time frame. That area now is rapidly urbanizing, as we know, in North Oakville. If you look in the Milton context in Halton Hills, some of those areas, although identified, they're slowly coming on stream. They're not quite as advanced in terms of the urbanization as you would see in the Oakville context. And then there's the addition of new Greenfield areas, and that would be more likely to occur, in this case, on the areas highlighted in red. You see the A, B here on the map, and the 1, 2, 3, 4. These are areas that aren't currently designated, but potentially could allow new development. So those are the kind of concepts that the region is thinking about. These concepts are the starting point. There may be a hybrid of these as we go forward. The information that you're seeing here is how much population can be accommodated in these areas. I'll take us back to that one. There was those 4 scenarios. The first one is the 500 hectares of new land would have to be designated to achieve that outcome. In the second scenario, it was 250 hectares of new land. In the third scenario, where you're essentially not expanding any urban boundaries, you're not designating any new greenfield areas, you're simply going to go and grow where you currently are. That sees 0 increase in land added to the urban area. And in the fourth area, which is on this slide, the new designated greenfield areas, that's 1,000 hectares of new land, or about 2,500 acres. Where are we at here? Okay, so let me just catch up to my slide. Do we have any questions at that point, Your Worship?
Council, I can't see you, so if you have a question, please unmute yourself, identify yourself, and if I don't hear from anybody, we'll tell Mr. Simeone to press on.
Sorry, Councillor O'Meara has a question.
Councillor O'Meara.
Thanks, Mark. I'm curious about this 2051 extension here. That's, to be quite honest, that's new to me. And I'm wondering when that's going to come about, what our commitment is going to be to that, and what, I guess, legally are we going to be locking us and future generations of councils into by extending it out to 2051?
Through your worship to Councillor O'Meara. Councillor O'Meara, that again was recently introduced by way of an amendment to the growth plan on June 16th, I believe. And I believe the time frame for municipalities to comment on that is July 31st. I'm getting a nod from Diane, so we'll take that as to be the answer. Excuse me. Sorry. I understand that HAP, the Halton Area Planning Partnership, is undertaking a review of that on behalf of the 4 area municipalities, purely from a policy and planning standpoint level. The information that they would be reviewing and providing comments on to the province would be based on solely on existing council policy, existing council documents, and on a technical level. It is my understanding that the HAP information will be forwarded to the ministry in time for their comment, and the members of council will receive a copy of that information by way of memo in a council package by the time that goes out. Subsequent to that, there will be a specific meeting on that, an item at the P&D council level, where you will be able to deal with it on a more specific level and see the impacts of that. So having said that, that's more of the process. The 2051 numbers, they're out for comment, councillors, so I can't really give you an exact answer of, remember we talked about the range of 60,000 to 160,000, so that's up for grabs right now. Remembering that at the highest point of Oakville's population, it represented approximately 33 to 35% of the overall population in the region of Halton. And remembering that the town of Oakville doesn't assign growth, it's the region that does that, so I can't speak for the region. But if you look at those numbers and you just say what's 33 or 35% of 60,000, 100,000, or 160,000, that's a rough way of estimating what types of numbers may be assigned to the town of Oakville. That's not presuming that the region will do that. It's just a way of trying to understand that. So it's early days with respect to this, and I'm trying to give you a best understanding. That's the project that's still kind of in motion, hasn't really landed yet. But those are the types of things you should be thinking about when you think about that. It will be more growth. It's out another 10 years in terms of the time frame. But really, it's 20 years from what you've already agreed to. Remember, we've already agreed at the local level and the regional level that we're going from 31 to 41. Hopefully that answers it, Councillor.
Well, I appreciate it. And I guess maybe what I was trying to ask was less of an operational answer and more of, to take you back to your planning school days, a theoretical answer about councils making decisions for generational councils ahead of us that, are they locked into this? I mean, I get 2031 and I get we need time to plan and developers and they all need time, but 2051 seems a long, long time for me to make a decision for future councils to have them locked in, and especially when provincial governments go on a 4-year time swing. I mean, to me, it seems inconceivable that every 4 years we get changes to the growth plan, but now we're going to be asked to look 30 years ahead and decide where, on rules and regulations now and placement now of populations, when when's too far off, I guess, is my question.
Through your worship, great question, Councillor. When you look at a lot of the planning that's been done in the province of Ontario, a lot of the work was laid in the 70s. The Parkway Belt West Plan was a document that people looked at blankly, I assume, back in 1970, thinking there'll never be development there. If you go down the 407 now, you'll see the fruits of those plans coming to fruition probably some 40 to 50 years after the fact. I guess my short answer, as you said, my planning school answer would be, these things help us understand long-term regional infrastructure commitments, things that require like 10 and 20-year commitments from a capital planning standpoint, things that require coordination amongst levels of government. So we have 4 municipalities in Halton, we have the region of Halton, we have the province. Sometimes there's federal involvement depending on what the issue is, say an airport or something of that nature. Things like that take time to align, and the market needs to respond to it. So I guess my answer from that standpoint is it's giving us a look to the future without tying us into the level of a zoning bylaw. It's telling us that, for example, there will be, pick a number, 33% more of that new number in Halton that we've planned for by the year 2051. How they grow and how many stories the building will be, that'll be the function of the future councils that can make those decisions at that time. Hopefully, we're laying the groundwork, though, by placing the growth on areas that's, has transit supportive densities, on the corridors makes sense, that we've picked where and how we want to grow, and it's not done by way of private application, for example, that council gets to make those decisions at every step of the way.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, someone's put up pictures of you. Councillor Haslett-Thiel, was that a wave or that was a wave? And the only thing wrong with this display, whoever's managing it, is I only see 6 of them.
Hey, Your Worship, this is Councillor Sandu, if you have time for me.
Councillor Sandu, we always have time for a councillor. You're next.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Simeone. I just have a quick question. It was actually back on slide 9 when you're showing the different areas. Can you help us and the public understand designated Greenfield a little bit better? So I'm seeing the different wards there, and I see the purple. But I guess I'm not understanding where the growth would go. Does this mean that the growth would not go into the DGA?
Yeah, so if I could get to the slide, thank you, Ken. So designated Greenfield areas, where am I? Oh, the purple one, thank you. That's the purple one. So you look at number 3, designated Greenfield areas. So I'll focus on Oakville. Back in, I believe it was 2007, somewhere in that time frame, the province came up with the idea of containing growth in a way that made sense from a planning standpoint and provincial perspective. And so they said, wherever growth existed at a certain date, and that's why that line, when we hear planners talk in Oakville, if you look at the southern limit of the purple boundary, which is basically Dundas, it kind of squiggles a bit and it goes straight and then it squiggles a bit. It's because they were counting building permits and buildings that existed as of a certain date and time, even though we knew that something might develop several weeks or months after that. Things were imminent, they were in the pipeline. The province said, no, that's the date. So that's why when you look at these maps, number 1, the boundaries seem funny. But they followed a methodology that the province outlined, and that's what that map looks like. So that's called a designated Greenfield area. That's a new area that's emerging, and it's experiencing new growth, and it's urbanizing. South of what we'll just refer to as the Dundas corridor is an urban area. And so those are 2 different things. So in the urban area, as an example, in the region of Halton, you don't require allocation to grow. In the north of Dundas, or that squiggly Dundas line, you need the allocation component for residential. It's things out. So what the province is also telling us is you don't just jump into these greenfield areas without filling the holes in your urban areas first, because that's a more efficient and better way to develop your infrastructure in a more economical way, as opposed to just spreading out all over the map, spreading out your services and not, getting those transit supportive densities. It's a way of trying to control the growth you have that's coming in a way that makes the most efficient sense of the use of your infrastructure. Hopefully I've answered your question.
I think it does, but I think it's now created another question in my mind. I'm sorry. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding this clearly. Because the area north of Ward 5 and 6, basically, or even part of Ward 6, so Ward 7, everything up to Milton, and even parts of Milton and Halton Hills, because those areas don't have urban structure already or are developing urban structure, and we have to get the pipes in, we have to get the hydro in, we have to get all of those things in, that therein doesn't lend itself to development initially with this plan. What makes more sense is to put it into those urban areas that are not purple. Is that right?
Yes and no. So I'll deal with the Oakville example because I'm I understand it better. The purple area in Oakville, which is the squiggly line north of Dundas, right now we're working on the growth nodes for there. So the north side of Dundas, it's called the Palermo area. We're looking at that as being a growth area in the context of the purple, the Greenfield area, as an emerging urban area in the community of Oakville. If you look at the area around the hospital, remember the hospital district, we have that potential there for life sciences type of work. That's another type of growth node we're looking at. If you look at the Trafalgar corridor intersection with Dundas, there's a corridor there, and then there's a corridor that runs along Dundas. We're looking at intensifying growth at that intersection and along those north-south and east-west accesses. And what that tells us is that's where the pipes are going to go first. That's where the big pipes are going to go first. That's where the big transportation options should be invested in. And in order to support that and achieve that outcome, you need to have the higher densities. which then informs the types of zoning applications we see weekly or monthly at P&D Council in terms of those taller buildings that seem to be aligning themselves up in those exact locations. Because it's based on this type of planning that has taken that 20-year perspective. And if you look further up there, it's not shown on here because I don't have the urban structure map on, but there are other growth potentials as you move up in northern Oakville, but the pipes have to fall, they go from the sort of the bottom to the top, as it were. And so we've identified where those are occurring, and that work is still being undertaken. You will, as a council, get to weigh in on the Palermo, the north side of it, the hospital district, and the work that's being done around the Trafalgar Dundas corridor. So that works, you'll have an opportunity to define exactly how that will look.
Okay, I think that gives me what I need for now. Thank you, Director.
Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. Mark, you mentioned something about the numbers and that these are minimums. What happens if we don't meet the numbers? Because from what I understand from Schedule 3, they're not targets, as everybody keeps calling them, but forecasts. And what I've been told by the minister is that nobody goes to jail if you don't meet those numbers, but in fact, you should try to plan to meet the numbers. But there's nobody gets hung or goes to jail if in fact those numbers are not met by the dates. Can you expand on that, since you said these are minimums?
They're minimums with respect to the language of the new amendment, through your worship, to Councillor Elgar. So I would agree with your earlier statements about targets and forecasts, but the new amendment to the growth plan does use the word minimums. It does no longer say target or forecast. It is now, if they pick 160,000 people for Halton, as an example, that's the minimum. Now, the key here is what we have to plan for. So let's just take a moment to understand what that means. The not going to the jail part, or going to jail part, I agree with you, that's not going to happen. But the exercise that planning staff, council charges planning staff to undertake is one where we can demonstrate to our partners at the region of Halton and the province that we can receive our share of growth. And let's say, pick a number, 33% of whatever the number is, 2041 to 2051. We've looked at the places, we say these are higher order transit corridors. There will be this many buildings with this many stories generating this many jobs and people per hectare. And when you add it all up, we have a plan that meets their requirement. It's not to say that if nobody builds those buildings by 2051 that we've done anything wrong. The requirement is to have a plan in effect, and that's really the challenge. Sometimes, the economy, like the time we're experiencing now, things are slowing down. It'll come back, but by and large, really the question is, where and how do you want to grow? And please show us that you meet these minimum targets so we can understand that planning work's been done. Once the planning work has been done, it triggers private and public sector investment to, achieve the infrastructure and the development that's necessary to actually turn those plans into reality.
You just used the word, these will be minimum targets. Is that the actual writing? Because that's really good to know. Is that what it says in Schedule 3?
The numbers are
minimum targets?
Through you, Your Worship. The numbers are minimum numbers. I'll remove the word targets from there. It's minimum numbers of population. Thank you.
Okay, so right now they're not talking, when we see the title, there may not be the word forecast in there, is what you're saying?
Correct. I understand the word minimum population is what the growth plan now says.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Mark.
All righty, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was hoping that you could just clarify for me of number 4, the new designated Greenfield areas. Is that an extension of number 3, or is it a different scenario in itself?
Yes. Sorry, I can't see number 3 on the screen. Just give me a sec to look it up. Is that you're asking me, Councillor, is number 3 on the slide that shows number 4? That the red number 3, that's an expansion of that area. Yes, that's what that would mean.
Okay, great. And then I did have some other questions. You can choose to answer them now, or I'm not sure if they're going to be in your presentation later. But one is, I guess, just kind of tying in allocation to all of this, just to paint a clear picture. When the next allocation plan would be and which growth target it would fall into. Would it be the 2031 to 2041, and how much of that we may have already met? And then my other question, I saw something in regards to alignment of transportation planning. So at the appropriate time, I'd also just like an update on our transportation planning to 2031 and where we are with that in our official plan as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
On the allocation piece, right now, our regional council has taken us to, Oakville Council has endorsed the Oakville portion of allocation. As you know, I believe it's the 2023, the growth. So we haven't gone beyond the 2023 year in terms of, so we haven't superseded, the 2031 growth number yet. And so we have several years before we get to the 2031 number. What will happen, however, through this process at the regional level and through the bottom-up approach from the town of Oakville and the other local municipalities is we will provide them the information as to where we want to grow. They will in turn tell us, this is Oakville's number, and you assign it locally to how you want it to be spread out across the map. And then those maps get changed, and in 5 years from now or 6 years from now, there's another round of allocation, and we finally get to the 2033 year. And then we'll be starting to pick away at those developments in the fullness of time.
So the allocation doesn't necessarily follow the same as the plan in terms of 2031 to 2041 to 51. It could go in smaller years of 4, as you just described.
Through your worship, to be clear. So in the case of North Oakville, I'll stay with the Oakville example as I'm most familiar with it. We have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 lands. Essentially, to make this really easy, just think of going from Dundas north to the top, and it's a way of making sure that the roads and the associated infrastructure that supports development, schools, parks, roads, natural heritage protection, that type of thing, follows in a logical manner so we're not leapfrogging. So we've planned out where we're going to go, but the allocation unlocks it as it's ready to go. So we know that we're going to have a certain number by 2031, but we're not going to get there until 2031, quite frankly. Right now, we're only in the 2023 allocation. But we have planned to the 2031 number. And the exercise you're undertaking now at the regional level is 2031 to 2041, changed by OPA, the change to the growth plan on June 16th, which moves us to 2051, and that's that uncertainty because they haven't finalized the number yet.
Mr. Simeoni, I think there's a chance that council would like you to continue now.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can just get back my screen. Thank you. So there's the map we've been or the chart we've been looking at all along. Just to remind ourselves, the bottom left-hand corner in blue, that's where we've been. That's the good work that council has undertaken on behalf of the community. That informs the work that's going on in the top line on the green bar, which is the regional process. And now we're going to move to, I believe we're talking about discussion papers here next. Yes, we are. So you probably heard of, there's discussion papers that are coming out around 5 thematic areas that the region has selected as important for community discussion, council input. We've talked a little bit about the integrated growth management strategy. That's where and how you want to grow at the regional level. That's the designated growth areas. We just talked about that, or within the built-up areas, that type of thing. But for the first time in a long time, actually for the first time ever, the region of Halton is entertaining climate change. And a reason I say that is although the banner climate change has never been in a planning document before in this jurisdiction, I think you've always had climate change policies. You just didn't call them that. Things like land use supportive densities, which we've all heard about well before the word climate change, really is a climate change policy. Intensification before expansion, that is a climate change policy, said differently. But this time around, you're actually going to have a chapter and a lens and collect that way of viewing planning with that particular outcome in mind. Of course, natural heritage discussion paper, this is, I understand, very important to this community as it is to all of Halton. Rural and agriculture doesn't exist so much in this community, but it's an important feature within the context of Halton. And we'll get into that in a second. And then a long-standing one, the North Aldershot planning area, which is really a Burlington issue, but also a regional issue. So let's talk a little bit about these discussion papers. More of them came out the other day. They're web-based and they're also printable. I don't know if you can see them on the screen there. They're quite lengthy. The urban structure one, I believe, is about 135 pages. It's a lot to read in one sitting. And so I would direct anyone who's interested in this to go to the regional website and hit what's called their landing pages. So you'd go to you'd see something like this, and then you say, oh, I'm interested in urban structure. You get to that one, you'll get basically a summary, an executive summary, and then you can drill further into that part of the document you want to investigate and consider more. So this, as we know, talks about where and how we want to grow at a regional level, and this is where the bottom-up approach is really important, so that your information can be shared with regional council, and that input goes into that product. It acknowledges the role of the local municipalities in the municipal comprehensive review. I think that's really important. And again, that's an acknowledgement that the region assigns the growth, that is the number, but they take the good work that the locals have done, specifically this council, and they say, you guys have done that hard work. Here's the number, you allocate that amongst yourself. We haven't got there yet in terms of the process. This urban structure, once settled, will help the region finalize the numbers that Oakville Council will have to distribute. Again, we talk about the climate change. Oh yeah, there's also changes to the land use methodology that the province has undertaken. So that's more of a technical thing. It talks about consumption of land and when urban boundaries get expanded. That's something that the region does, and there was changes to the growth plan, I believe, in 2019, I'm going to say. So that is an automatic, because the way they did it before is not the way they can do it in the future. The climate change highlights. Most, if not all, of the municipalities in the Halton region have passed climate change emergency policies or resolutions, I think it was last summer. And this gives us a chance to consider things like growth management, transportation, energy and utilities, agriculture, natural heritage, and environmental quality in the context of a climate change lens. As I said before, we've always had transportation policies that look for an efficient transportation system, and the type of development, in other words, transit supportive densities that might be associated with those higher intensity or growth corridors. But now we're going to say, how does that make sense from a climate change standpoint? It's not just seeing it as a transportation issue, it's seeing it as a part of a climate change issue, which is really fundamentally different than what it has been before. As we understand from the slide, 90% of our emissions are from buildings and transportation sources. So how we move in the future is going to become significantly different. Councillor Mira had offered the point next year, or earlier in this conversation, that we may be binding councils to decisions at 2051. But if you think of 2051, you should think about the role of the private automobile and where that might be in whatever that is from now, 30 years from now, or whatever that is. And where we park those cars, and is there something different that we need to do now that enables that future and that transition? I would offer that in my own view, I think we live in a time of transition. We live in the time of the car and the time of the loss of the car. But it's also a troubling time because we all understand the practicalities of not having the infrastructure readily available to make that transition seamlessly. So this is the first step in a long road, and I think this is an important feature as we go forward. Things like energy efficient buildings, compact communities, and reducing car dependencies will all be themes you'll see coming out of this discussion paper. Natural heritage. Now, I can't stress enough that natural heritage, to my experience here, is extremely important to this council, as it is to regional council. It's been a central feature, as you see on the slide, since the 1980s. Want to maintain the biological diversity within the natural ecological functions within the Halton region. Halton has done an excellent job, and Oakville has done an excellent job in supporting that outcome. The region's currently working on a review. There's a couple of technical things. The regional plan has to accommodate changes to the the provincial natural heritage system as identified in the growth plan. I believe that's 2019. I think that was 2019. So they will be charged with adding that provincial layer in addition to their own. There's also a change in the way the mapping has been done. And so the mapping will provide an opportunity to expand, potentially expand some of the natural heritage areas at a broad base level. So the exercise that's being undertaken now at the regional level, I call it a desktop exercise. No one's walking around on site with, staking banks, measuring things and staking tops of slopes and drip lines or anything like that. But they're looking at things that make sense at this point in time, and the end result of that process will be an identification and protection of potentially additional natural heritage features, understanding that in the future, when development is imminent, there'll be site-specific a look at those properties on a site-specific basis, which will refine the actual limit of the natural heritage feature. And of course, there's always a strengthening in policies. As we move forward in planning, things typically don't go back. Excuse me. They typically go forward, and the policies of the province have changed since the plan was done, the previous regional official plan. And so there'll be changes in policies to reflect changes in provincial policies as well. Rural and agricultural systems. Really no rural and agricultural lands exist in Oakville per se. I know North Oakville, there are lands that would be characterized as such, but the planning has identified that for an urban growth in the fullness of time, at least till 2031. But it is an important feature from a region of Halton standpoint, so it's an important feature for the community of Oakville. The prime agriculture lands is an important thing for all of us. So the mapping is being undertaken to make sure they've got that right. They have the right mix of uses identified? Do they have abilities for economic opportunities like agritourism? What about the impacts of that? You have to grow the food, you have to transport the food, you have to store the food, and you have to deal with the waste of the food. Has that been looked at properly? Special needs housing, I'm assuming that's workers, but I'm not sure on that. And so the regional official plan strives to support a vibrant rural and natural system that helps with economic growth, secures access to food, and helps ensure environmental sustainability. Again, not entirely present from a planning standpoint, specifically within this community, but I'm sure important to the residents of the town of Oakville. North Oldham.
Your Worship, Councillor Chisholm, I have a comment or a question.
Councillor Chisholm, please share your comment.
Thank you. I'm just going with back to thank you, that's what I'm looking for. The agritourism and so forth. There seems to be a push going on with respect to food security and opportunities for residents who live in townhouses and condominiums and so forth to have the possibility of having garden plots and vegetable gardens and so forth on town property or regional property, whatever the case may be. It seems to be a major push happening in our community, because since with the pandemic, people are so really concerned about food security. Is there anything in the plan to look at additional garden plots? I know we have some in the municipality, but to expand that in later years in the forecast?
Through your worship, to Councillor Chisholm. So this, at the regional level, I would have to say no. Its scale and the scope of its review is at a broader geography than say a plot close to a housing development. But that does not mean that the town of Oakville cannot look at that as part of its planning, its planning regimen, so to speak, its planning toolbox, to see what can be done as part of developments through town-owned lands, as part of a development proposal. There's no reason why we can't consider those types of outcomes in the context of an individual development, or even on a local kind of review basis. But I just want to distinguish the regional system and what they're doing likely does not look at that level of detail.
No, I guess my question was just it could be under the umbrella of one of those bullet points that it's not lost. I guess it's a small part of it, but as long as it falls under the umbrellas regionally and municipally, I think it's important knowing, with climate change and everything else and food security, I think it's become a real issue with our residents. Just for consideration.
Thank you. Any more, Your Worship? Oop. Getting my screen back. There we go. Thank you. So the North Aldershot planning area, this one goes back to the 70s. This is in the Burlington area. This would be locally important in the context of Burlington. And from a staff standpoint, we have no, you'll see that the paper only has peripheral relevance for Oakville. So we have no concerns with respect to that issue and see that as an issue for Burlington to speak to. So where are we here on this map? So previous work we've done. Oh, yes. Now we're going to get into this. Sorry, I forgot where we were here. So let's remind ourselves of what council has done and the work the council's undertaken over these past few years. This is a foundational piece. This sets the table for everything. This is an extremely important planning document, in my opinion. This is your urban structure. This is official plan OPA, official plan amendment number 15, which council has approved, I believe, 2 years ago. There's one outstanding appeal. It basically sets the table. If you look at the map, you'll see a series of circles and nodes and corridors, call them. This is where you want to grow, and this is how you want to grow. The corridors will see higher intensity land uses, and that will support higher order transit. And higher order transit, I mean potentially in the long fullness of time, subways, that's in the way fullness of time, but rapid bus transit, that type of thing, and that would evolve to a higher, faster, even better. And at some point, you might get subways way down the road. And then the areas that you see in yellow, that's where we really want to keep the stability of the residential neighborhood. I'll come back. Sorry, I thought I had two maps on this one. So if you look at the Palermo area, you're currently dealing with the north piece. The circle to the east of that, that's just by the hospital district. The Trafalgar, Dundas intersection and the corridor north of there, and that's part of what the work that's ongoing right now. This was identified in the urban structure. If somebody was to walk into my office today and say, where can I put a major development in this town? I'd show them this map and say, see all the circles? See all the areas along the major roads? That's where you should look. You see the yellow areas? That's our stable residential neighborhoods. We prefer if you didn't grow there. When we talk about where and how you want to grow, this is where and how you want to grow. We preserve the fingers from the escarpment. That's the Green River, 16 Mile Creek, 14 Mile Creek, everything coming in from the escarpment to the lake. We don't want you to grow there. We don't want you to grow in the Parkway Belt. We don't want you to grow in the residential neighborhoods. Oh yeah, and we have these heritage districts that are important to this community, but all those other places, that's where we can accommodate growth. You will recall a presentation last fall where I said we can accommodate all the growth for the region of Halton to the year 2041. I know that raised some concerns, but the fact of the matter is, on this map, all of the regional growth that Halton can or is required to receive to the year 2041 can be accommodated on the map you're looking at right now, in the circles and on the corridors, without having to get involved in developing in the stability of the residential neighborhoods. That's an important piece to understand as we go forward. And so this is work that's been undertaken, the council's already approved. We've done these, you see the official plan numbers, so the Bronte area, the Kerr Village area, the downtown village area. Again, we have not assigned populations because the region hasn't got there yet in terms of their process. We're saying that's fine, region, but when you give us our number, this is where it's going to go. These are the areas that we're going to start to look at. And you'll note we're not circling the stable residential areas. And the employment commercial update, we've undertaken that. And this is OPA 26, approved just yesterday. And that's an important piece. It speaks to the commercial changes along these areas and allows us to go forward to the 2041 timeframe. That's important for the regional plan review. Spears Road corridor update, that's work that's already been done. That was approved as of yesterday. The work that, this was early work done, 321 and 322. This was done, these are quick wins. There was some assessment of the original policies of the North Oakville plans. And we weren't seeing, our council wasn't seeing exactly the right mix in neighborhoods. Some of the developers were electing to go for more of the low density, low rise type of development. And so we took it upon ourselves, at council's direction, to put a different mix into the neighborhoods, so we weren't having just like residential, there was more of a vibrancy to the neighborhoods, and also, excuse me, preventing things like townhouses directly onto Trafalgar. We would see that as non-transit supportive density. So 321, 322 has already been approved, and those policies are in effect. That's work that's already been completed, and that work stems from, really, it's implementing the urban structure. So this is work we're undertaking now. So this is the hospital district. We used to call it the Holman, and nobody could pronounce it, so we've just simply called it the hospital district. These are the lands centered right around the Oakville Hospital. We've dealt with the lands of an applicant, I believe, last summer to the east of the hospital. And there's a study including the property. So it's east and west of the hospital and a little bit north. And that's looking at what is the potential from a standpoint of creating a vibrant node that has its focus on a health sciences type of things that might spin off from a research standpoint, or things that are associated with the hospital itself, and potentially a residential component that may support that type of node. That work is being undertaken now, and we'll be bringing it back to council later this fall. The Palermo, did I hit 2 there? Palermo growth area and the North Oakville West. So the Palermo growth area is, if you look at the map and you know where Dundas and Bronte is, and I know you do, we're really dealing with the north part of that circle. So we've completed the circle. The south part of that circle was already there. We've added the north part to look at that, sort of complete that community, anchor that part of the northwest quadrant of the town with its own growth node. Makes sense as a connector piece from 2 major roads from a transit standpoint, and sort of, a mixed-use node at that location. And then we want to bring into the context of that the North Oakville West plan. I believe that's also coming back to you this fall. That work's being undertaken, and you would have seen the beginnings of that about a year ago. The Bronte Major Transit Station Area, MTSA.
I can interrupt, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor or Mr. Chair. Just a quick question about the last 2 bits.
You go right ahead.
Thank you. I know that there has been consternation over the radio towers that exist up north of Dundas as it applies to what's going on at the hospital, areas around the hospital, and also with Palermo. And I'm wondering if as we do these reviews, are we looking at options as to what can be done or what to do about these radio towers as we go forward?
Through your worship. So last summer, thank you, Councillor, we dealt with one of them, as you know, in the context of 1 and then being 2 and potentially 3 development applications just to the west of there. And well, actually, 1 was to the east, I believe, and 1 was to the west. Those ended up doing site-specific reviews to consider how those projects might go forward without interfering with the operations of that facility, that radio facility. The level of work we're doing is doing the planning for it. I'm just looking at Diana, we're doing some specific work on the radio towers? No, we're not. So we're not doing specific work on the radio towers. When North Oakville was done, there was no specific work done on the radio towers. And at that point in time, I will use the words an aspirational plan. In the fullness of time, this will be what this landform or this geography evolves into. The work we're doing is looking at from that standpoint. What would the number of jobs, what would be the density of people that live and work there, what will be the major infrastructure investments, what will be the natural space pieces. And in the fullness of time, as we go forward, in the short term, you will likely see site-specific studies like we saw last year in the context of at least 2 applications, that how the development can go forward while the radio towers peacefully coexist in the near term.
And Councillor, I could just add, as a former customer of the CRTC and a license holder, they have a requirement that they have enough land so that they don't interfere with people outside their land. They're supposed to confine their effects to their land. And the CRTC remains a bit of a arbiter of whether or not they're conforming to their license, but their license requires them to operate without interfering with other people. So there's a bit of a regulatory fence around them that I'm not sure they quite fully appreciated when they came forward last year.
I understand that, and I guess it was just more to the fact that what I hate to call junk science got in the way of some of the developments that could have been in that area. But certainly I appreciate the answer, and I apologize for the interruption.
Thanks for the question. I love...
Just on that, sorry. I wonder whether it would be possible we could get a full report back on why all the computer systems of the machinery up there building the bridge totally got burned out. Like, I never did see the official report on that as to what caused it. But what I was told was it was because of the radio tower signals. And if what you're saying, Mayor Burton, then there should be a report totally saying that had nothing to do with the radio tower signals. I'm just wondering who has that report or where we could get it so all of council could read it.
I'm not aware of a report, and let me...
Are you aware of the incident?
Let me offer you a little bit of clarity. If
Okay.
they caused any interference, they were breaking the terms of their license. And if they caused interference, they were overpowering their signal. And overpowering their signal has been a matter of CRTC policing action through the decades. There was a very famous case down in the Niagara of a gentleman who had a low-power transmitter, and he tried to operate a long-range radio. There's 3 classes of radio stations. I'll call them little, medium, and big. He had a little, and at night, he was in a spot on the frequency band where if he amped his power, he could be a long-range station. It took years for the CRTC to shut him down. So the distinction is not that they don't cause interference. The distinction is that they're not allowed to. And if they do, they're over the line of their license. That's the point.
Okay, so I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'll email the region to try to see if I can get the report so we can share it, because from what I was told, that kind of caused a bit of a problem when the machinery lost its brains. So I'll dig into that, don't you worry. Just on the other matter, just on the issue of, I looked at the Amendment 1 that just came out that we can respond to until the end of July, and it definitely still uses the words forecast. And I wonder if Mr. Simeone can show me where he has seen the change, and also where it says minimums. Because from what I see, it's a reference forecast, which represents the most likely future growth. And then there's the highs and the lows. But I think he knows, he's got documentation showing that it actually says it's not a forecast and that's a minimum. And I just wonder whether he could share that with us at a later point.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll look to get that to members of
Thank you, because I just went through Amendment 1 here that's due for response by the end of July, and I can't find it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Simeone, you were about to visit Bronte.
Thank you. So Bronte MTSA, I'd like to give you the acronyms, Major Transit Station Area. Interestingly enough, I believe it was the Minister of Transportation made an announcement this week about speeding up certain things around MTSAs, but I don't believe they come as far west as Oakville, at least not at this time. This takes an otherwise an employment area. And by the way, I would identify this. This was identified in the 2017 growth plan, I believe. So it's a provincially designated opportunity to be a growth area. It's almost like our urban growth center. Well, it is like our urban growth center. So it's not up to us. So we're essentially mandated to look at it. So we're undertaking that work now. Council saw the beginnings of that work about a year ago. And again, this work is mostly done, and you'll be seeing its final information later this fall. Uptown Quarry review. Again, this is work that's underway. So if we start at the beginning, work you've already done, work that's underway. So this is work that we're going to complete, or we've completed and work that we are completing. This is centered around the Uptown Core, which is Trafalgar Dundas intersection. We've developed a preferred plan. There is significant growth pressure along there. We've had a couple of, at the time, OMB hearings, now LPAT. I know that in the southwest quadrant, there's interest in developing and redeveloping lands in that area. So there's major interest in this corridor. So this is timely that we're getting this work done. Again, this work will be before council in the fall, and looks like it'll be a very busy fall at P&D Council. Midtown Growth Area Review, launched in 2018. Again, this is to remind ourselves that it's important to touch base with your planning documents on a regular basis. Otherwise, it's 20 years since you looked at it. Actually, reminds me.
It's Councillor Adams. I wondered if I could take us back a slide to ask a question.
Sure.
You just mentioned something about the southwest quadrant of that. Can you tell us more about that? Because apart from the general discussions that we've had previously in our review processes, I have not been made aware of specific plans.
Through your worship, we have no specific application, nor have we been pre-con, Councillor, but we have had preliminary interest discussions. I'll use those. People that have expressed preliminary interest. It's basically the lands on the southwest corner of, Trafalgar and Dundas. So where the grocery store is, that area, the LCBO, those lands in there, that's essentially one large property owner in there, and they've expressed interest in seeing what that lands may look like down the road type of thing. So their work is proceeding as is ours, and it's.
Sorry, it's Councillor Knoll. Can I just ask a quick question on that? So Southwest Lands, we're referring to the lands owned by Metro Ontario and First Pro Smart Centers, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and so when you say that there's considerable interest in more development there, are you referring to something over and above the original plans by the developers there? Something that we hadn't originally contemplated through our various studies?
So what through your worship, I do not have the benefit of being here at the time when those studies were undertaken, but I can tell you that what I've seen represents a deviation from the heights of buildings that were originally contemplated at that location, but nothing's been finalized. Those are made at a concept level, and that all the background work's being done. Nothing is advanced to the level of a pre-consultation.
Find out more.
Sorry, could you be talking then about the property that's south of, just to make it colloquial for everybody else, the keg? Are you talking about that plot of land there? Because we've had some pre-discussions with the applicant who does want to, unfortunately, put some towers there. Is that?
That would be part of the lands, through your worship, to Councillor Grant. That would be part of the lands. There's quite a big chunk of land in there, as you know, and there's a concept plan that deals with all of that. That would see it evolve into higher density residential and mixed use in the fullness of time. But that's a concept at this time, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Thank you. Where was I here? Okay. Midtown. I was just going to say, Councillor Mayer had talked about, making decisions out to 2051. That's a great question. So one of the things under the Planning Act is it kind of forces municipalities to reconsider. It's almost like a touchstone. Have a conversation with your community every 5 or 10 years so that when you go to implement something, it's not something that was decided in 2021. It's something that was decided in 2021 and revisited in 2026 and revisited in 2031. And as you get closer to when a development is imminent, you start to get clarity in terms of what will actually evolve on the site, knowing that you started with a concept and you'll end up with a more specific development in the fullness of time. So the Midtown's been around for a while, and that's why I wanted to make that comment here. It's just a good opportunity to say, we've been talking about Midtown for a while. What do we know now? What's the changes from the province? Has funding arrangements changed? What are the development interests on these lands? What are the people of today saying? And we bring that together. You will see that again in the fall. And again, I'm reminded it looks like it'll be a busy fall. Sorry, where am I in this one? So this is work.
Councillor Haslett, I have a question on Midtown.
Well, it's time to ask it then.
Okay. So in terms of that review in the fall, we have an application, as you're well aware, that is in the Cornwall district. And there's some discussion about what is the population and commercial, I'll call it forecast, that would have been aspired to when this initial plan was put together by Town Council and Planning. But some of your earlier comments have talked about there's population and then there's, when we get to it, what the final number would be. Can you help me out? How would we get to now what the Cornwall district minimum population is planned for?
Through your worship.
Not all of Midtown, but all of the different elements that build Midtown.
I understand. Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. So let's start what at the beginning here. So we have 20,000 people in jobs. I believe the breakout is 12,000 people and 8,000 jobs within the midtown. And then we've broken it down into the districts. Last night we were dealing with the Cornwall district, as you know. So that gets down to more details. What's happened in the meantime is that there's been a change in the frequency planned and projected by the Metrolinx in terms of its rapid rail system. So they're moving to 15-minute service. That requires, my words, an intervention from a design and engineering standpoint, like where are the tracks going. They're getting to like engineering standard kind of drawings. And that starts to really make us look more significantly and closely at all of the issues that present themselves to see how that might happen in the short term, no longer the fullness of time. I believe the rail is expected to go at 2023. Yeah, that's only 2 years out, or 3 years out, 2.5 years out. So we have to get our work done to make sure that we're satisfied with that. I know that we're currently talking with Metrolinx on some site-specific details, like the Chartwell Crossing, for example, the platform at east of Trafalgar, that type of thing. So those are the types of things that are driving the review. We're also looking at potentially allowing different mixes of land uses and some adjustment of boundaries in there. Again, that work is not completed. I believe it's been in front of you already at an earlier forum, and you will have an opportunity to get into the details in the fall.
But my question is, the numbers related to Cornwall District, how do we know what the aspirational, and I use that loosely, number was for each of the districts within Midtown?
I'm going to ask Diane to come up if that's okay. She can help me with this one. Thank you, Councillor.
Through your worship to the councillor, I'm over here. Through your worship to the councillor, I think last time we did the review, we looked at it a little more holistically. And now, for example, with respect to heights, we have minimum heights, but we were dealing with maximum heights through the bonusing. So what the intent of this OP is to provide a little bit more clarity on where and what the minimum and maximum heights will be. So that was the intent of updating it. What the population projections were through the last review, I'd have to look that up and get back to you.
And thank you for that, Diane. And so I recall that there was a debate about whether or not it should be 12,000 people and 8,000 jobs, and if that ratio should be shifted, and could it be shifted? Are we locked in again to those are, are those locked in?
No, we're not. Through your worship, sorry, to the councillor. So this is our opportunity to look at our mix. I think the nature of employment, for example, has shifted, and maybe it shouldn't be so siloed in looking at employment on one side and residential on the other. And we need to look at how to make more of a mixed-use community with a minimum amount of jobs and requiring that mix, and then get more into, so it's a 24/7 active community right at the GO station on all 4 quadrants, on both sides of Trafalgar, I should say.
Thank you for that. Thank you for answering my questions.
Oh, yes, sorry for the delay. Through your worship to council. So we're talking about work that's now coming, I believe. So the residential review was launched in 2018. And we've been conducting ongoing research and data analysis, including best practice review and monitoring related initiatives. We have been preparing a preliminary draft policy and directions for internal review and council and the public. So that's work that will be coming to you. I don't know if this is coming in the fall, I suspect not. And the objective here, as when we talked about the where and how you want to grow, this is where I said the urban structure, or OPA 15 right now, is important, because we've already decided for ourselves and the world where and how we want to grow. And we've said this is where those numbers, big numbers, can happen in Midtown and in Bronte and North Palermo and all of that. But the stability of the residential neighborhoods and how you insert new development in those neighborhoods is vitally important to this community. So this is important to achieving that outcome. And I've had a number of conversations with most of members of council on this. It's important in all the wards, and we look forward to that product. the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. So we have work that's not started yet. So what I was talking about.
Sorry, Councillor Chisholm, I just had a question on the last slide.
Yes.
Under the residential review, is the character study review or report coming through that residential review?
I'll have Diane on that. Thank you, Councillor.
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Chisholm. So if you remember when we did the residential character study, what came out of it was, it really wasn't the policies in the OP that were as concerning. There is some updating that has to occur, but it was more we need to look and revisit the zoning for our low-density residential areas, and we need to update our urban design guidelines for our more established residential communities. So I think that's what you're really talking about with respect to the implementation of the residential character study.
Just so maybe I'm confused, just for clarity's sake, in the initial character study and the walkarounds we had, we talked about facades, we talked about setbacks, we talked about side setbacks, and all those things that maintain the character of the neighborhood. Where is that in the process?
So through Your Worship to Councillor Chisholm, so those type of details are in your zoning bylaw, that you wouldn't deal with side yard setbacks, et cetera, through an official plan. The zoning bylaw is what implements the official plan, and the official plan is more of the high-level policy structure. So it's going to be a separate study, and it's going to update the residential zoning for the RO zones.
Okay, just to add to my basic understanding, I understand the zoning, but the question is, and we've had as you know, in our ward, a lot of issues and a lot of complaints about some of the designs of homes don't fit within the character of the neighborhood, and that, to me, I know I have the holder and all those circumstances, but was there not any consideration with respect to that?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Chisholm, yes, we will be looking at what we can do in the official plan, but I think the actual metrics is through the zoning bylaw with respect to your setbacks and your buildable area, et cetera. Landscaping strips.
And what about design and facades of buildings?
Again, through Your Worship, I think it would be more looked at through the urban design guideline update, that we have specific urban design guidelines that speak specifically to the stable residential areas, so it would be through that update.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I may, just as a supplemental to Councillor Chisholm, so the work has not been lost. I participated, Councillor, as you know, in those walkabouts, and there was great interest and obviously great enthusiasm for the outcome. So we took away some high-level principles. What that has been done is what's happening next is we're feeding it into things that will affect change through the implementing documents. I think this is where Diane was going with that. So the official plan can only go so far, and we've gone that far. The next round of study is now to say, okay, we've had that information provided to us. We know these things to be true. We know this is where the community wants to go. What does the zoning bylaw have to do to get us there? So that work is yet to come. And that will also affect the matters of urban design and matters of zoning, and to some extent matters of site plan will also be changed to reflect those things once we get that work completed. So think of it as a two-phase approach. One was a high level, what are the issues, where are the issues, and what are the consensus on the issues? We've got that part. We've already addressed that. But as Diane said, the official plan is not the document to change things at a building permit change. That's a zoning bylaw, site plan, and potentially urban design guidelines. That work will be done, and we just haven't got there yet. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. North Oakville East Secondary Plan, Part 2, not launched. Regional Greenfield work, provincial built boundary. The built boundary may be changing under the growth plan right now. We'll have to wait and see on that. Provincial lands needs assessment. This is all new work and proposed new planning horizon to 2051. So this is work not yet to be launched, and there's still some uncertainty. There's been a lot of change, as you know, with the new provincial government, maybe not so new anymore, but since the Ford government's come in, there's been a lot of changes to planning documents. We seem to be responding more than we are being able to move on it. So this will give us an opportunity to deal with the 2051 number in the context of North Oakville East and that type of thing. That work is yet to be launched. And again, the objectives are on the screen. Make sure we conform with provincial and regional planning initiatives, provide some understanding of commercial review in the new context of whatever those changes are from the province. We also want to, right now we have a livable Oakville, a North Oakville East and West secondary plans. At the end of the day, they'll all be one document. So that work is yet to be done, and that will be part of this work. Make sure the urban design guidelines, which is one of the implementing documents, does what it's supposed to do from a council and community standpoint. And again, the natural heritage will be considered, transitional area designations, and the implementation of the town's urban structure. As I said to you before, the urban structure is all approved except for one outstanding appeal, which does not affect, I believe, the North Oakville work to come. This is I will call this the fun stuff we have to look forward to. So we haven't nailed down the time frame for this yet, but you know we have to have our work done by July 1st of 2022. So no more than two years from now, I guess. So with discussion papers like we've seen at the regional level, the ones I showed you before, and I'm sure you've got copies of them, we have the transportation review, and that'll be at the level of a discussion paper. And I think the words I've been using, but it's really the language of the growth plan. Where and how do you want to grow? Well, how do you want to move around Oakville to a 2051 timeframe? And, you know, we see it at every P&D. Last night we saw it on council. There was an interested person regarding transportation needs as it related to pedestrian and active transportation in the context of an active development application. This will be a great opportunity to have that conversation with the community about how we move as we go forward towards 2051. Sustainability, obviously an important one. There'll be a great opportunity to have conversations with the community on a ward basis, or however council wants us to have that conversation, we'll be happy to do so. Community institutional, so review of health, educational, religious, recreational, culture needs of the town. The town is changing, and so we want to make sure our policies are reflective of whatever those changes that are brought to Oakville. And implementation and monitoring. That likely will be more of a technical piece that says, this is what you said in your policies before, and we've counted up these things, and this is what we think our successes are not so much successes were with respect to achieving those policies, and what we should put into place in the future to make sure the policies we adopt are actually working for the community. And then there's the physical infrastructure. There'll be a discussion paper on that. That's likely to have more of a technical flavor to it, but it doesn't mean it's not open to everybody. It's still part of the community, and it's an important part of the community. And obviously natural and open space, I'm sure we'll have a lot of conversation on that one. And that's all to happen. We haven't nailed down the actual dates yet, but again, as I've indicated to you, they have to happen within the next 2 years.
Can I just ask a question on zoning, implementation, and monitoring?
Yes.
Of course.
Sorry, it's Councillor Haslett-Beal. So there was, I understood in the budget that got deferred, a zoning bylaw review. Would that have been, what would have been covered by that zoning bylaw review that was deferred? And yeah, so let me ask the first part. What would have been covered by it?
Through your worship to Councillor. So what happens under provincial law, once you've adopted an official plan, Councillor, you have 2 years to implement the changes that are necessitated by the changes to the official plan to your zoning bylaw. So if we change the official plan tomorrow, we have 2 years, and let's say we change it a lot, and it means, geez, our zoning no longer implements that official plan, we have to change that zoning bylaw too. And you have to do it within 2 years from the date of adoption. So in planning, we've carried forward a little bit of money to make that happen. And during the COVID situation, that money was sort of pulled back because we didn't see us doing it in the time of the COVID crisis. So, but we would need it again as we go forward. Once all this planning work is done and the official plan is complete, we will then be required to make those changes to the zoning bylaw. It's really important. Remember, the zoning bylaw implements the OP. And so then when they say the zoning is in conformity with the OP, that's the perfect outcome. The worst case is to having a policy that says this and a zoning bylaw that allows something completely different. We've all agreed on this, but we can only implement that. So this allows that and this, if you can see my hands, to be in conformity, to be equal. And that's what that budget is for.
Okay, so actually that's actually very helpful to me. So when our zoning definitions and bylaws are out of sync with what's happening in an industry, how do we make those adjustments?
Well, I guess to start with, as I indicated, you'd have to look at your official plan and get that right, because really a zoning bylaw is only meant to implement an official plan. Upon appeal, one of the tests would be, your official plan says this and your zoning bylaw says that. Like, how does that make sense? You'd have to reconcile those two. So there'd have to be an understanding at the policy level of what the expected outcome is, the objective, the purpose, the desired policy outcome. And then you ask yourself, does my current zoning bylaw meet those outcomes? And if you said yes or no, depending on yes or no, you do work or you wouldn't do work.
So let me go to a direct point. If the official plan's intent is to have livable Oakville, and you have a zoning bylaw that defines warehousing in such a broad way that in fact it isn't representative of what the work being done, how do you go about ensuring that the policy of livable Oakville is relevant in the zoning bylaw that allows the use to continue?
So, through your worship, zoning or official plans are much like the provincial policy statement. You can't just read the parts that you like. You have to read the entire document from front to back, and they're all backwards and forward related. So, livable Oakville also can be defined as a community that has a vibrant economic base, not just okay. So that balance the council would seek to find is the exercise you would hope to achieve in the context of the official plan discussion. How do we have a balance of livable is defined as how? Well, if you look at the front end of the official plan of Oakville, you see a number of broad, I think it's section 3 or section 2, you'll see a number of broad-based objectives. And then each chapter in the plan is supposed to implement those. And then you get right down to site-specific policies. So you got the big policies, and you got the smaller policies, and then you got flavored policies like natural heritage, and you got on this site, this is how we're going to implement it. But everything has to be balanced out. You can't just focus on one thing at the expense of the other. You have to say, well, we've got 5 out of 10, but we missed on these 5. So how do we find that balance? In some cases, it's clear. There's only that policy should only exist there because that's where the gold is. The gold's not over here; it's right there. So we have to have the gold policy where the gold is in the ground. Gold doesn't move. But if you use the geography of Oakville to balance out certain policies, you can say, well, maybe it doesn't work here, but if we do it over there, then we've found that balance in the context of the community. So hopefully, I know the question where you're going, and I'm trying to answer it in a way that makes sense.
Well, I think it's very helpful how you're explaining it. However, my question still stands that if we have definitions in our zoning bylaw that are too broad, that are out of date, you're saying that the official plan and the zoning are supposed to be integrated. So how do we as a council ensure that those zoning bylaws are truly reflective of what's going on economically in industry?
So again, through your worship, I would answer, I'm giving you my planner's answer here. I would get the official plan right, and then I would implement changes through the zoning bylaw. I wouldn't use the zoning bylaw, I wouldn't site-specifically amend a zoning bylaw on a site issue and then work backwards and change my OP. I would get the OP right on a broad level, and then I'd work it down to a site-specific level. And definitional things are very site-specific when it gets into zoning.
So I wasn't proposing that it needed to be site-specific. I actually think we have a problem with our zoning definitions across all of town.
So then,
and that's why I'm asking on a macro level, how would we address zoning as it relates to the official plan and those definitions?
Well, then I would suggest we need to look at the, let's pick an area where we have a concern in and consider that in the context of the townwide review, study, however you want to call it, and capture all that information at a policy level and get that higher level, policy right for everybody, and then drill it down to zoning. Because zoning deals with stuff like height, setback, number of parking spaces. That's not the issue. I don't know. I know the issue you're speaking to. Whatever the zoning says you get. If you don't like the zoning, change the OP. And so I would say we need to look at that at the context of a community-wide study on whatever that issue is, get consensus on it, make sure we have that balance from a livable standpoint, and then move into the zoning once we have consensus on the OP.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Carrying on that discussion, Diane talked briefly about Midtown and the need to look at perhaps the split between employment and residence. We're going through that with zoning in our BIAs with the need for more patios as a result of physical distancing. We're always going to have things like that come up. In terms of evolving businesses, where are we going to allow our drone aerodomes, or whatever we're going to call them, to be? We know some of these things are coming, but quite frankly, we don't know what we don't know in terms of changes in business, changes in policies, changes in ways of doing things in autonomous vehicles. How can we be reactive enough to that? Because we don't want to get into the OP as often perhaps we should.
Sorry, through your worship to Mayor, to Councillor Giddings, sorry. I think that's an excellent question. So I'm looking on the screen right now, and I can offer you that the titles of those discussion papers to me offer an excellent opportunity to inform us at a broad-based level. I'll take transportation, for example. That's a great idea. Like, where are the aerodromes going to be for the drones? Like, I don't know. But where are the autonomous? How are we going to handle that? How's that going to work? And so if you look at transportation, you look at sustainability, look at all those titles in their broadest sense. And then you look at things like implementation and monitoring, right? So I don't know what I don't know. I absolutely agree with you. What's happening real time in a certain industry? We have bylaws that perhaps the definitions were crafted 15 years ago based on, what was important 20 years ago. But if you get the policy right, you understand, if the discussion papers work perfectly, we will capture the here and now as it is and understand where the future's going and set in place things that we count and measure so that when they change, we're informed by those changes and we can inform ourselves on when we need to change our planning documents. So that's where I think the relevance of the implementation and monitoring is really important and vital, because it's not just passing a policy and forgetting about it and just reacting to applications when they come in. You can pick the aerodrone industry, let's just make that one up, and say when we did this discussion paper, there was none in Oakville. Now there's 35 in the GTA, 6 in Oakville. This is what they look like. This is how big they are. These are the issues. This is the land use impact. This is what we know. And we project 15 more in the next 12 months. What do you want to do about it? As opposed to reacting on a site-specific level. So I think there's a great connection between the two questions I've just dealt with through the discussion papers as a way to inform ourselves of changes in our planning document, which will then get hopefully the right things into the zoning bylaw.
All right, thank you for that. Last point is, I understand the transportation, sustainability, community, and institutional. Where would we put grocery stores and car dealers and places of worship or other types of activities that are going through fundamental change? Would that be under the broad community and institutional banner?
That's a great question. I don't see that specifically there, other than your reference to, I think you said institutional or something like that one. So I don't see.
Just right.
No,
do we
right.
need another bucket for, when people order their cars online? Are we going to have showrooms?
We've seen it. Click and order. I've seen on TV right now for cars. As a COVID, you can click and order. I said, what does that mean? There's no more car dealerships? Like, who knows, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought. Just in the last 3 months, I've noticed that. So, no, that's a great point. Can we take that away from this discussion and consider that? This is work that's yet to be done. So
by all means,
thank you
if
for
that's under shopping or shopping/retail, whatever, we may need another bucket.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Worship, it's Councillor Longo.
Go ahead.
So Mark, with the discussion paper themes, is there a way of weaving in kind of climate change resiliency, or, community energy plan, because the transportation sustainability, natural area and open space, physical services and utilities, they all kind of touch on it. But is there a way of kind of threading or weaving the theme of climate change resiliency throughout those to see, as we future-proof our community, if you will, and kind of building on what Councillor Giddings was talking about, the mode in which we're going to be, carrying out commerce or interacting with people, places of worship, because of things that have happened with COVID-19, can those themes kind of be brought out through those discussion papers?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Longo. That's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it. Absolutely. This is forward-looking work. We have not undertaken it yet. We're here today to tell you what we think we're going to be doing, and this is staff's view as it sits on work that's not been undertaken yet. That's an excellent suggestion. I don't see why we wouldn't want to weave those things into all of that. The last thing I want to do is preside over a process like this and go to a meeting saying, oh, I'm sorry, that's not the purpose of this study. We're not talking about what you think is important in your community's future. So the more input you can give us on what those discussion papers should be talking about, and this type of planning document should be the level of a conversation that you can have with the average resident, not a group of planners at a conference. There should be a conversation where you sit down and chat about the future of the community in ways that make sense to them. It's our job to turn that into the language of a planning document, not the communities, not councils for that matter. It's our job. So I appreciate your comment. Leave that with us. And if you have any other suggestions, I'd be happy to hear them.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
If I can throw in that, it's Councillor Grant. Hi.
Hi.
It's staring me in the face is transportation, and you do talk about urban mobility strategy. The planning page for the town of Oakville lists the last transit study is 2010. And I'm just wondering, as we are looking at mobility strategy throughout the urban areas, if we are going to be examining major corridors within Oakville, but then also without Oakville. I mean, within Halton. There was talk at one time about a mass transit bus going along Dundas. There was talk about it coming down from Trafalgar to help people from Milton. And I'm just wondering, now that at least the roads are getting widened for that kind of preparation, if we are going to be looking that far ahead to see what we can do about that. And also connecting to Mississauga, because a lot of people who live in Oakville do consider this a bedroom community and work in Toronto, and so having something other than just a GO train, having an actual system where they can hop on in Trafalgar, catch on Dundas, head down to like square one, let's say, it is, I think, an important way of getting people out of their cars and onto buses. So, sorry for the long-winded question, but are we looking at updating any of our transit goals?
I'm going to have to pass this off to Diane if I could. I'm sorry, Councillor, I was not here in 2010, so I just need to have someone who has a little bit better memory than I do in this.
Through your worship to the councillor, I think there's lots of layers you talked about there. One is we will be updating the Transportation Master Plan, and the Transportation, Jill Stevens' team is quite involved in our OP review and definitely our growth area and a corridors review. Metrolinx has a 2051 GGH plan they're working on with the MTO, and that's looking at what's important in Halton Region, and Oakville are very involved in those kinds of technical advisory committees. We also, where else is it going to go? Halton Region owns or runs a lot of the roads, those major roads you're talking about, so it's important for us to work with adjacent municipalities to ensure that someone in Burlington can get to Oakville Hospital without having to go south and north again. And so there's lots of planning going on with respect to the region, with Metrolinx and the town, and we're trying to align all of our work.
Okay, so that would be a report subsequent to the discussion paper that we have on our screen?
Through your worship to the councillor, it's part of the discussion paper, but I just wanted to emphasize that there is a lot of work going on outside of the OP review with respect to transit and transportation planning.
Great, thank you. I just understand that as we are being forced into a model where we have to grow, we have to make sure that people can get from point A to point B without having to worry about being stuck in traffic for a long period of time. And, public transit is always going to be the way to solve that, but I'm hopeful that we can at least find some ways to do that. So thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Councillor. As Diane points out, some of the reports that we will have to read may have the region of Halton's name on them rather than the town of Oakville. We will always make sure, to the best of our ability, to make sure that the town-only councillors see those too.
And just again, to Councillor Grant, thank you for your comment. What I'm taking from this is that there's more work to be done from a staff level to engage council in terms of what it sees as the priorities in terms of these discussion papers and how they should be positioned. Certainly we can sit down with internal departments like our friends in transit and see what we can work out together, given your good suggestion. There's, at this point in time, this work that hasn't really been launched yet. And so I'm thinking there's an opportunity here, based on what I'm hearing right now, to further refine the scope and clarity of these projects so that it represents what you feel is an important outcome for all of us. So thank you for that.
Hi, I just have a question. It's Councillor Palmer. Can you hear me?
We are hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, I've lost my video, so I'm not sure what's going on there. All right, so my question is just taking it back to the urban design guidelines, Mr. Simeone, and I just wanted to understand, do those guidelines essentially, once they're reviewed, do they come back to council?
Yes, sorry, through you, Your Worship, yes.
Okay. And the reason I bring this up is because I do find, and I've also heard from many residents across the town, that some of our growth node areas, Dundas and Trafalgar, the buildings could be a little bit more aesthetically pleasing. And I feel that what's gone up so far, I mean, nothing can really be changed there, but going forward and considering the amount of growth that is coming to the area, Dundas is an entry into Oakville. It's one of the first things that people see when they enter our town, and I think we really need to keep that in mind and review the structures that are going up. And I don't know if that's something that's done through site plan or something that we would look at in our urban design guidelines, but I feel that work does need to be done there.
Through Your Worship to Councillor Palmer, in planning, there's limited opportunities to control the external design of a building. That's been a fundamental feature of the Ontario Planning Act for a number of years. We can control massing, that's the size of a building, how bulky it is. We can control setbacks at the second story, so you can actually articulate the wall of a building by zoning bylaw. But it's not like a Picasso. You can't, if somebody wants to put a blue wall up, there's little, if any, authority for municipality to say you can't have blue bricks on your house. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. The toolbox we get to play with is the one that province provides council. With that said, there are a number of magnificent outcomes from an urban design standpoint in this community. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You drive from Barton Street in Hamilton and go all the way through, go through Burlington. You'll notice when you get into Oakville, and you'll also notice when you get into Mississauga, they're different, and that's fine. It's the same planning act, same growth plan, all different outcomes from an urban design standpoint. So the challenge is to engage the community in what's important to them and reflect those outcomes in each community. That's what the community wants, that's what the community gets. I do appreciate that there may be some design issues as we start off our development in North Oakville, but we're happy to undertake reviews and consider all options available to continue to provide good urban design in this community.
So really what you're saying then, the final design of the building is really what the developer submits and is approved by council, and we have no say over. I'm just trying to understand, because the buildings on Dundas, north of Dundas, look very different than any other buildings in Oakville. When we talk about character study, I'm just trying to understand, was this like an idea? Was it a vision for the NOESP for the North Oakville secondary plans? Is this something that was kind of already envisioned, that all of the buildings have a very modern look? I'm not saying that they all look bad. It's a very different look. Like just from different sides of the street, south of Dundas to north of Dundas, you can see a very large distinguishing.
So thank you, through your, sorry, Your Worship, through the mayor to councillor. That's a complicated question. I'll give you my best short answer. If you start in south Oakville and go up, you're seeing different periods of time. The bottom of Oakville started in about 1806. The top of Oakville is at 2020. You'll see a different, land was cheaper and basically free back in 2006. You see large lot singles when rich people could buy homes and build homes in the way that they did with materials that you couldn't afford today. Small lot singles exist in North Oakville partly from a market influence. And I can drive through this community and tell you that house was built in the 50s, that house was built in the 60s, that house was built in the 70s. Everyone knows an 80s style. It's got the big garage up front. Those are reflective of architectural features that exist at a certain period of time. The community, the council does not have really the authority to do that. We can stop every single house on the street looking the same. We can say you have to alternate to the garage, here and there. We can tell you that the height looks like the setback, the amount of landscaping, open space, but there's a market element that enters into this discussion, and it's reflective of the time of development. Again, I would point out, and I'm encouraged by the fact that we continue to have opportunity to change our planning documents, and input and comment like yours is well taken and understood, and we will look to see what we can do as we move forward.
Thank you. And then just one other comment I have. I know one of my council colleagues has brought it up in the past, but if we could at some point get an idea of what that whole built up area is going to look like a sketch of some sort, just so we can see a final picture. I don't know if we have anything in the works or if anything's been presented before, but I know I would certainly appreciate to see what our future plans.
Thank you, Councillor. Understood. Thank you. We'll look at and see what we can provide.
Thank you.
Mayor Burton, this is Councillor Sandu.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you, Director Simeone. I just have to tag on to what Councillor Palmer was saying right now. I understand the limits from a council perspective, but I wanted to touch back on something that you just mentioned. You said that there was going to be constant engagement for the development in the area to ensure that the community has a say-so in how certain development projects may look in the long term. And I think that we've got a bit of a stick point here in North Oakville because, quite frankly, none of this community was here when these development projects were submitted. So, or I'm not going to say none, but a lot. So I just think that that's something to take away for staff to ensure that we have an additional level of engagement for the community and the newer residents that are coming to the town to ensure that their thoughts about visual aesthetics and things like that, just like how we heard in P&D Council yesterday with South Oakville, are also taken into account.
Through your worship, absolutely agree. I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I totally hear what you're saying. We're happy to participate, take your good input, and see what we can do together and make sure that that toolbox reflects what you want to see in your community.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Did you have something? Okay. Mayor Burton, Diane would like to make a response to Councillor Grant, if I may.
Let's get Diane up here and let's ask who has a mic open, because somebody's got a mic open and extraneous noise is disturbing the meeting.
Through your worship, Councillor Grant, I just wanted to point out that on page 41 of the Regional Urban Structure discussion paper, you will see that it outlines the transit priority corridors for Halton Region and what's important and what would be contained in each of those corridors. So that was an important point to make.
Thank you. I'll review that then.
So I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation, but again, on the work to go forward, often we're sitting at meetings where the zoning bylaw was set in place before someone was on council, and we're dealing with issues that we really have limited opportunity to change. The discussion paper opportunity sounds like it looks like a great opportunity for council and staff and the community to come together and have those conversations that we all know are important, and I look forward to that work. There's been a number of provincial updates. that I said at the beginning, there's been many changes since we had the new provincial government, not so new anymore. The changes to the 2051 number, the proposed lands needs assessment methodology. That's a highly technical way of understanding how much land you'll need up to 2051. PPS changes, community benefit charges. We still don't know what that's going to mean to us. Bill 108 regulations, the built boundary update, that was that squiggly line I talked about on Dundas. That's going to move. And there's provincially significant employment zones that still work, was done. They've concluded some of it. Actually, anyway, that work is not completed yet at the provincial level, so we don't know what that's going to mean to us. The region certainly doesn't know, and certainly us at the town don't know. So that's something to think again. So these things are things that are going on in the background that will have impacts on all of the planning discussions we have as we go forward. And I think that's the end of this presentation. Does anyone else have any questions at this point in time? So again, I just want to remind ourselves, I'll go back to that one piece. We wanted to show you what's happening at the regional level, the green part you see at the top. Work we've done, work they've done, work that's underway, and work that you look forward to participating in, and how they align. And we see we have a deadline of July 1st of 2022. And that would be the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As soon as the screen, oh, there we go. Councillor Sanju.
Thank you, Mayor Burton, and thank you again, Director Simeone. I know that this has been kind of a shootout at the OK Corral for you. You've gotten a lot of questions today. I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I think this is an appeal to you as well as planning staff, not only here at the town, but also at the region and to our regional councillors. So again, wanted to thank you for your information, and I understand this process is multifaceted and the information provided from each municipality in Halton. Though we don't understand how and when the province will initiate the growth strategy from what our conversation was today, I understand that this is going to stretch all the way to 2051 per your report. My concern is purely from a long-term growth perspective and our planning overall for the residents of our town. If the obligatory timelines are sooner rather than later from the province, how will we be able to manage this all from an infrastructure perspective? So that's the first takeaway. We do keep hearing that we're a transit-first community here in North Oakville, but we're not able to keep up with our ridership to ensure those people can even get to the GO station right now. How are we able to rightfully plan and say that this is the best approach to conform to a plan when in fact we aren't able to deliver our end of the bargain? I worry for North Oakville and urge our staff and regional councillors to take these concerns back to the table at the region. We have to hold our provincial representatives accountable for more schools and facilities in the north, and we cannot have an influx of people without what's required and paid for with their tax dollars. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you very much, Mark, for the detailed overview. I guess my only comment, and perhaps it's a request, but I'll leave it to you, is that, you know, with the growing work that keeps getting laid on our planning department desk, I feel the gap between the work that you guys are doing and that's being relayed to us, and the gap that is the understanding of our residents about that is getting further and further and not closer and closer. And we see that rubber hitting the road every single planning and development council meeting we have. I mean, last night was the perfect example. Here's a transit plan, here's a building right near, and what we're talking about is parking. And we're not talking of in congestion and road, and we're not talking about where are we 5 to 10 years from now with automated vehicles? Where are we with vehicular and transit? I mean, we're losing the conversation around, you know, where we're going to be building with density and why density as opposed to sprawl, and why, you know, the climate change impacts and the transportation impacts and all of those nuanced conversations that we as councillors get to have with staff, but that like Councillor Robertson and I had with 200 residents in Brawny in January, and it took about an hour and a half to really get them to understand. It's not just about how do I drive my car up Brawny Road when these people move in. It's a whole different paradigm of thinking, and it's not about when, it's about how it's going to happen, because it is happening. And I don't know whether our planning staff needs a dedicated planning communication cohort, or we have to do a round of town halls, or the region does, but we have to start bringing our residents up to speed with the conversations and those reports we're going to be having and those discussion papers, because it's hard to continue to have these discussions about where the province is going, where they're telling us to go, and our residents still worried about how they're going to get up to the mall because there's going to be too much traffic. And I think we have to figure out a way strategically on how we're going to bridge that gap between the work that we're doing and the planning staff are doing and bringing our residents along with us. Because I think that is the most difficult thing that I know I have to do personally. And I don't know whether we work with our communications department to figure out a strategy or some way to do that. But that will make all the difference in terms of our planning development meetings and the expectation that residents have when all of these applications come in next year and the years to come. And I'll leave it there with you just to mull over maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Your Worship, to Councillor Mayor. That's a great idea. I agree with you. We're often working on what's in your inbox and can never get to the next customer, if you know what I mean. And so we'll take that away. I share your view. I'm frustrated sometimes when there's not enough hours in the day for all of us to get what we'd like done. But I do see a great opportunity. Again, I'm looking at those discussion papers. Part of what we'll look at taking from today's discussion is an opportunity to fully get a really good conversation with the community, and one that's supported by a communication strategy that you all endorse. So let us take that away, and it's something we'll bring back to you.
Councillor Grant.
I'm sorry to keep beating this drum, but I think Councillor O'Meara has kind of touched on what I've been talking about, which is we need to figure out a transit system that gets people from node to node to node. We need to have a way that people understand that you can take your bike, you can for a short trip, you can take a bus for a longer trip. But as we go forward with all these plans, I mean, the nodes are important. The nodes keep growth under control. And as we talk to people about how they can get from one place to another, we need to understand how, especially transit can be an important component of this. So I again, and thank you to Ms. Childs for her notes earlier, but we really need to have that discussion as we talk about growth happening in all these different nodes.
All right. I would welcome at this time a mover and seconder to receive the report. Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Elgar. Any objection? Madam Clerk, that carries. The next item is our consideration and reading of the confirmatory bylaw, and that would be assisted with a mover and seconder, Councillor Grant, Councillor Lischina. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there is none, and the confirmatory bylaw is carried. Thank you, everybody, for your time and attention and your great questions. It's been terrific working with you, and we are adjourned.